Today, we're going to take a look at the best case scenario for the Democrats and the Republicans in the upcoming governor's elections. I normally do these in separate videos, but because we've only got 2 states this year, we're going to combine it into one. So those 2 states are going to be New Jersey and Virginia. Both of them have term-limited governors, so we're going to see somebody new. Now, the primaries are in June. The general election is, of course, in November. And if you follow this channel, you know that this is just the best reasonable case scenario. I don't get too crazy. There's a lot of time left. Things are going to change, especially after the primaries. So we'll start with the Democrats. Let's first look at New Jersey. So here we've got outgoing Governor Phil Murphy. He came in as a progressive. His approval ratings don't really look all that terrible. However, he only won re-election by 3 points. That was much closer than expected. And in the presidential election, this state voted for Harris surprisingly by less than 6%. But at the same time, the national environment is likely to be favorable for the Democrats, at least by a little bit. And overall, this is easily considered a blue state. So there's a little bit of something here for each side to focus on. But in this best case scenario for the Dems, it's not entirely clear which candidate would be the most dominant in the general election. Given the lead of the state, it could be a more progressive candidate or it could be a more establishment candidate. Now at this point, it's not at all a done deal, but I'm going to say it's most likely to be Mikey Sherrill for the Dems. She's got a range of different experience. She's considered more moderate. She might not be the nominee. She could lose to a more progressive challenger, but I'm going to say she's a little bit more likely than not to be the nominee. The general election for the Republicans, you could try to make an argument that they need a Trump-style candidate here to be competitive. You could again point to the presidential election, with Trump getting a lot of Hispanic support and working-class voters. So there's an outside chance that that might be favorable for the GOP. But even in this best-case scenario for the Dems, I still think it's a little bit more likely than not that Jack Ciattarelli is going to be the nominee. He lost to Phil Murphy back in 21, so it's kind of open-ended. But either way, I think the best-case scenario here for the Dems is going to be a likely rating. Now, it's close to safe, but I'd say it's high single digits at this point. But because of the unknowns, I think it'd be a little bit too unreasonable to think it's going to hit 10 to 12 or more points. Now, I could come up with a scenario. Maybe Bill Spadea is the nominee for the Republicans, and maybe he runs a disastrous campaign. The national environment favors the Dems heavily, and Mikey Sherrill runs a phenomenal campaign. Then sure, this could hit 10, 15, maybe even more points, sort of like what Josh Stein did over Mark Robinson in North Carolina. So we'll see what happens, but for now, it's going to go likely. Now let's go down to Virginia. Here we've got Governor Glenn Youngkin, the Republican. His popularity has been pretty decent, but going back to the 1970s, this state usually elects a governor that's opposite of the party in the White House. The one exception was back in 2013. Now there's exceptions to every rule, as I just said, but again, with the national environment shaping up to be a little bit more favorable for the Dems, given how this state has become moderately blue over the past decade and a half, the Dems are going to have at least a slight edge here no matter what. Now the likely nominee here for the Dems is going to be a little bit more obvious. We're looking at Abigail Spanberger. She decided not to run again in the U.S. House last time to focus on her run here for governor. She seems like a decent candidate. She's going to have some suburban appeal. She's likely to run a solid campaign. Now on the other side, Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears is who's likely for the Republicans. Now it does look like Amanda Chase has gotten into the race for the Republicans. She tried to run last time. She's considered more controversial. She might have been the nominee last time if the Republicans did not change their nominating process to a convention as opposed to a primary. Now because I think Sears is much more likely to become the nominee, I'm not factoring Chase into this scenario. If I did it, then that would bump this up to safe. But because I'm thinking it's going to be Spanberger against Sears, it's still clearly going to favor the Democrats here. And I think the margin for me right now is going to be similar to New Jersey. In this, it's going to be high single digits and it's going to go likely. So in this best case scenario for the Dems, we've got one easy hold and one easy flip. Now we're going to look at the Republicans in a second. But first, one thing I want to point out here about the polling in New Jersey. We did have recent news here that Monmouth University is not going to be conducting polling in the future. Now they're from New Jersey, so it's going to be disappointing as we head more into this election. But there's still a couple of other local pollsters that should be able to cover this race. But at the same time, the polling has not really been all that great in this state, both for governor and for president. So it might be easy to say that the Republicans have been underestimated in this state. Doesn't mean it's going to continue, but it's something to keep in mind. Now let's move on to the best case scenario for the Republicans. Again, we'll start in the Garden State. So in this, for the Republicans, it's going to be Jack Ciattarelli as the nominee. I think overall he's more likely to become the nominee than not. He's probably a pretty good fit for this state, at least as of the last time he ran. He's not overtly extremely pro-Trump. He's got a little bit more of a moderate appeal, which is going to be necessary to win in a state like this. He's already proven he can almost take down an incumbent governor. So because of that, he's given it one more go. Now, it's tough to say who Ciattarelli would ideally like to run against in the general election. You could easily make a case that the progressives like Ras Baraka or Stephen Fulop are going to be more unelectable than someone like Josh Gotts. Gottheimer or Mikey Sherrill. You could also make the opposite case and say that those are establishment corporate Democrats and that the progressives are going to be harder to beat. I think the field is too wide open and people are just not really paying all that much attention at this point because we haven't even gotten into the spring or the summer. So I do think Sherrill is the small favorite, but I don't think she's invincible. Things could easily change in a month or two. So there's a lot of different interpretations here, but Chitterelli is going to have to deal with Trump being in the White House. It's not going to be an easy thing to navigate. If the national environment somehow turns positive for the Republicans, or maybe even is neutral, that's going to be Chitterelli's best case scenario. So we'll say he runs a strong campaign, Sherrill or whoever the Democrat is runs a weaker campaign, and voters in this state are looking for a change. In that scenario, I'm going to say Chitterelli is able to pull out the win. It's not going to be convincing, but he's going to get it by maybe 2 to 3 points. So this state is going to go leans for Chitterelli. And last, we're going to go back to Virginia. In this, it's still going to be Winsome Sears against Abigail Spanberger. Spanberger is going to be tough to beat, and Sears is going to have to try to find a similar lane as Governor Glenn Youngkin. She's going to have to make sure she does not alienate the base, but there's also a lot of more moderate voters in Northern Virginia that she's going to have to make sure she doesn't lose as well. We saw Youngkin do it, but it was a narrow victory in an environment that favored the Republicans. Spanberger is prepared, but at the same time, Sears is in elected statewide office as lieutenant governor. So I think Sears is the underdog, but at the same time, Glenn Youngkin was also the underdog, even just a couple of months before the election. In this, we'll say it's more of a neutral type of environment. Sears runs a good campaign, she gets the support she needs, and somehow Spanberger is just unable to get that kind of a turnout. So in this best case scenario for Sears and the Republicans, she is going to hold the state, but it's only going to be by about 1 to 2 points. And that's it. In this, Republicans would hold Virginia and they would flip and pick up New Jersey. It's unlikely, but not at all unreasonable in a best case scenario. Considering we've got many months to go, there's a lot of different ways you can interpret this. I try to not consider anything too much on the fringe. So it's clear at this point Democrats are favored. They could become even more favored as time goes on, or maybe things can unexpectedly change. We'll be watching the polls, but those are definitely not everything. We'll be watching the primaries and trying to follow the campaigns in the general election. But even with all that said, sometimes there's just a curveball that nobody sees coming. But that's it for now at this early best case scenario for the Democrats and the Republicans in the upcoming governor's races. So let me know in the comments, how does your best case scenario look for each side at this point? Do you agree that the Democrats are clearly favored, but it's possible for the Republicans to pull it out if things line up for them? And who do you think the strongest candidates are in this race for each side? Let me know down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.